The bunk was empty. Master Chief Wade Harlow stood in the doorway of the small sleeping quarters and stared at the neatly folded blanket, the flat pillow, and the bare floor where a pair of boots should have been. He checked the time. It was 3:17 in the morning. He had come to wake Chief Petty Officer Mara Calloway for an early briefing. Instead, he found nothing, no rifle, no pack, no sign of where she had gone. On the small wooden crate she used as a nightstand, there was a folded piece of paper. He picked it up. 3 words were written in her careful handwriting: "Don't come looking." Harlow read those 3 words twice, then once more. Then he set the paper down, walked outside, and looked out at the dark mountains that surrounded the forward operating base. The air was cold and still. Somewhere out there, beyond the wire, one of his best operators had just made a decision entirely on her own. He did not panic. But he did not sleep either. Mara Calloway had grown up in a small town in Montana, where the winters were long and the summers were short, and her father spent most of his days guiding hunters through country that had no roads. She had learned to shoot before she learned to drive. She had learned patience before she learned most other things. Her father used to say that waiting was not doing nothing, that waiting was the hardest kind of work there was, because it required complete control of your own mind and body. She carried that lesson with her everywhere she went. She joined the military at 19. Her test scores in intelligence and observation were among the highest her recruiters had seen. Her marksmanship scores were even higher. For a few years she worked in military intelligence, reading maps and signals and the small details that most people overlooked. Then her sharpshooting results made their way to the right people, and she was offered something far more rare, a position embedded with an active Navy SEAL team, not as a support role, but as a combat operator. She accepted without hesitation. Her teammates were not easy men to impress. They had years of experience and had seen every type of soldier that the military could produce. They did not say much about Calloway in the beginning. They watched her instead. They watched her on the shooting range, where she was consistently the most accurate person present. They watched her on training exercises, where she could go still and invisible in terrain that offered almost no cover. They watched how she moved, how she planned, how she stayed calm when things changed fast. After a while, what they said about her was short and simple: Calloway doesn't miss. She had 11 confirmed engagements across 2 deployments. She never talked about them. She never made them into stories. What she cared about was the work, reading the ground, understanding the situation, and making sure that the people beside her came home. Which was exactly why, 3 weeks before she disappeared, she had stood up in a mission briefing and said that something was wrong. SEAL Team 7 had been working toward a single objective for most of the month. Their target was a man named Yusuf Daraz, a logistics coordinator for a militant network operating in the Kinnar province of eastern Afghanistan. He was not a commander. He was not a well-known figure. But the intelligence community had quietly identified him as someone who kept a very dangerous organization running smoothly, moving money, moving people, moving information. Taking him off the board mattered. The plan was straightforward. A small assault element would approach the target compound at night, moving through a narrow valley that offered the shortest route. They would enter, secure the building, locate Daraz, and extract. Clean and fast. Calloway had looked at the maps and the aerial photographs for a long time. She had asked to see the full imagery package twice. Then she had spoken up. She said the valley worried her. It was narrow, she explained, and the walls on either side were high enough that a small group positioned above could control the entire floor of it. The satellite imagery showed nothing in those positions. But the imagery was 48 hours old, and the approach route had been assessed by people who had not walked that particular ground in the dark. She used the word funnel. She said it felt like something that had been prepared for them. Command listened. They reviewed the intelligence again. They concluded that the assessment did not support her concern. There was no evidence of a secondary force. The mission would proceed as planned. Calloway said nothing more in the meeting. She went back to her bunk that night, spread her maps on the floor, and sat with them for a long time. 2 days later, she was gone. She had moved out of the base on foot, alone, in the dark, carrying only what she could use and nothing she did not need. A suppressed rifle. Water for 3 days. Minimal food. A satellite phone she intended to use only once, if she found what she was looking for. She moved at night and rested during the heat of the day, tucked into the shade of rocks and dry brush, invisible to anyone who did not know exactly where to look. She covered 14 kilometers over the first night and part of the second day. Her feet knew how to move quietly across loose stone. Her eyes had adjusted to working in low light long ago. On the 31st hour, she found what she was looking for. They were in a dried riverbed, northeast of the target compound, approximately 800 meters from where the SEAL team's approach route would have brought them. 14 fighters, well-positioned, armed with automatic weapons, and at least one crew-served weapon mounted on a low rock formation. They had been there long enough that they had made small comforts for themselves, a fire that was kept very small and sheltered from view, rotation schedules, a system of hand signals between positions. They were not there by accident. Someone had told them that Americans were coming through that valley. None of them were looking for a lone woman lying flat in the scrub above them, completely still, watching. Calloway spent the next 17 hours in that position. She did not move more than was absolutely necessary. The temperature dropped well below freezing during the night, and she controlled her breathing and kept her muscles slowly, carefully active enough to stay functional. She counted the fighters again and again until she was certain of the number. She documented their weapon positions. She tracked their rotation schedule, how often they changed watch, who moved where, when they were most alert and when they were most tired. She memorized everything. She wrote nothing down. She trusted her own mind. On the 47th hour, she picked up the satellite phone. Harlow was awake when the call came through, which was not unusual. He had barely slept in 2 days. He answered before the second ring. There was a pause, and then her voice came through, quiet and completely steady. She spoke for 4 minutes. She gave him the GPS coordinates of the ambush position. She told him the number of fighters and described the placement of each weapon. She told him the timing of the rotation schedule and when the position would be at its least alert. She told him which direction offered the cleanest approach and which to avoid. She described all of it in the same tone a person might use to give directions to a familiar address. Then she said, "You would have walked right into it. Hit that position from the north first. Then take the house. I will be on the ridge." She ended the call. Harlow sat for exactly 30 seconds. Then he started making his own calls. The intelligence that Calloway had gathered was immediately brought to the task force commander. It was specific, detailed, and consistent with what experienced operators recognized as reliable ground truth reporting. It could not be dismissed. The original assault plan was pulled apart and rebuilt around what she had found. The team was briefed in the early morning hours. Nobody said much. They looked at the coordinates she had given, and they understood what she had done and what it meant. They got their equipment ready. The operation launched at 5:20 in the morning. The assault on the ambush position came first, moving in from the north exactly as Calloway had directed. The fighters there had been awake for a long time and were well into the part of the night when attention tends to drift. They did not have time to react. The engagement was fast and decided quickly, with no casualties on the American side. From a ridge above and to the east, Calloway provided overwatch. She had been awake for more than 50 hours at that point. Her hands were steady. She fired twice during the engagement. Both shots were necessary and both found their mark. After the ambush position was cleared, the team moved on the compound. The assault went according to the revised plan. Yusuf Daraz was found inside, along with 2 others and a significant collection of communications equipment. He was taken into custody. No Americans were hurt. Not one. Calloway walked back through the gates of the forward operating base at 8:11 in the morning. Her boots were gray with dust. There were shadows under her eyes that came from more than 2 days without real sleep. She carried her rifle at her side, and she walked the way she always walked, straight-backed, unhurried, without any sign that she thought she had done something extraordinary. Harlow was standing in her path. He had been standing there for a while. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was complicated in the way that the expressions of people who have been both furious and relieved at the same time tend to be complicated. He said, "You went AWOL." She stopped in front of him. She met his eyes without flinching. She said, "And 14 men are gone instead of ours." Nobody around them said anything. there was nothing to say. The formal process that followed was exactly what military procedure required. Calloway's unauthorized departure from the base was a serious breach, regardless of what it had produced. She sat before a review board and answered every question directly and without excuses. She acknowledged that she had left without permission. She acknowledged that she had acted on her own and outside the chain of command. She did not argue that it had been the right thing to do. She simply described what she had observed, what she had concluded, and what she had done. A letter of reprimand was placed in her file. In the same week, a classified commendation from the task force commander was placed in the same file. Both documents sat together in a folder with her name on it. She went back to work. Nobody who served alongside Mara Calloway ever forgot those 48 hours. Not because of the commendation, and not because of the reprimand. They remembered it because of what it represented, the kind of quiet, solitary courage that does not announce itself, does not ask for recognition, and does not wait for someone else to act when action is clearly needed. She had not gone out into those mountains to be a hero. She had gone because she believed something terrible was waiting for her teammates, and because she was the one person who could go and find out. That was all. That was enough. Years later, one of the SEAL operators who had been on that mission was asked what he remembered most about Calloway. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said that he remembered the way she walked back through that gate, covered in dust, exhausted, saying nothing, and how that image had stayed with him as one of the most remarkable things he had ever witnessed. She didn't look like someone who had just saved 9 lives, he said. She looked like someone who had finished a job and was ready for the next one. He paused. I think that's exactly what she was.